Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are in this world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. I'm the moderator for today's event, and I welcome you all. Today's webinar is how to make application teams more effective with microservices and DevOps. It's being sponsored by Datical and IBM. Before we get started, I would like to just make a few housekeeping announcements. First of all, today's event is being recorded, and the slides will be available also post-event. So if at any time during today's webinar you miss something, you come in late, whatever, just know that you will have the opportunity to see the webinar on demand, and you will be receiving an email link to that, to the recording on demand. It will also be on DevOps.com. We'll also be asking questions of our panelists today from the audience. So if you have a question at any time during the event, please feel free to use the control panel to submit your question, and then we'll take about 10 or 15 minutes near the end of the webinar to go over those questions. Okay, moving rapidly along, our webinar today, how to make application teams more effective with microservices and DevOps. We have two excellent panelists today. And the first is Robert Reeves, who is no stranger to DevOps.com. He is CTO and co-founder of Datical. Our other panelist today is Eric Minnick, who is product manager at Urban Code at IBM and also no stranger to DevOps.com. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today.
Always a pleasure.
Great, great. Well, Robert, I'm going to go ahead and just turn it right on over to you and let you guys do your thing.
Well, for sure. Well, thanks, guys, for joining us. And so we're going to be talking about microservices and DevOps, and what are some things that people need to be doing to prepare as their organization adopts microservices. There's a lot of care and feeding that is different than your normal three-tier applications. And so I just wanted to kind of start the conversation off and have a discussion and level set on what exactly microservices are. And, you know, Eric, from my perspective, it's really to solve that problem of how do we deploy a monolithic app that is brittle?
Right. Yeah. Well, or the monolithic app is brittle, so how do we re-architect it so it's not?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that makes it so brittle is that, you know, these applications that we have at large enterprises, they've been around for a while. We put a lot of time and energy in there. And so, you know, for example, if you have like the, you know, customer user registration subsystem that all the other pieces depend on, if you change that one piece, you have a real chance of breaking a lot of stuff. And so coordinating all these different teams is just tough with monolithic. If we go to microservices, well, that implementation is hidden behind a web service. And so it allows us to just deploy that one microservice. As long as we maintain backwards compatibility, we're good. But there's some other benefits too, right, Eric?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're able to move more quickly. You've got that freedom to deploy things independently, as you said. And then I think you've got that ability to scale different parts of your app as they need to, rather than having to duplicate the whole thing. And that's just super powerful.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's, you know, look, this diagram that we're showing here, this came from Martin Fowler's post on microservices that he put out years ago. And I really like it because it kind of details, you know, that scalability change. You know, if we look at the left, you know, you see that, you know, we've got the orange that looks like the, you know, continent of Africa here. And over on the right, you know, we only have 4 instances of that, but over on the right, we've got 5 of them. And we only have 3 of the little blue diamonds, 3 of these triangles. So you're able, based on load, to scale you know, those microservices without having to lather, rinse, repeat with, you know, racking and stacking servers or firing up full stacks in the cloud. You know, those are why we're going there. And I'm just kind of curious, getting ready for our first poll question. What is, the folks that are on this call, are they using microservices today? So
well, I guess it would help. Yeah, I was going to say yes. I guess it would be help. It would help if I actually took my microphone off mute, but I apologize for that. So yes, here is the first poll question. And it's coming out right there. It is your organization using microservices? You can go ahead and select one of the following. We've got using microservices in production, using microservices in development, investigating microservices, or not using microservices. So go ahead and make your choice. We'll give you guys about 10-15 more seconds to make that choice, and then we'll close out the poll and take a look at the results. So,
hey, Eric, do you think this adoption of microservices is going to follow kind of that same path we saw with DevOps and cloud? Kind of starts out in the development organization and then follows the life cycle?
It might, but I think it's an architectural change, right? And so I do think it's going along with the DevOps movement. It's going along with a cloud movement. It's moving along with a containers movement. Those things are very tightly linked. There's a lot of fascinating interrelationships. So I see something like this where I see 20% are using it in development. I imagine that's a new app, right? And it's moving towards production. And so I see that as a rapidly changing landscape more than a half measure. Is that how you read it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's one of those things where we're moving so fast. Our companies that we work for are trying to put out more applications with more releases. And we've kind of hit the limit on what we can do with the monolithic app. We really need to change how we architect our systems to prepare for that rapid change and that rapid evolvement, or rather rapid evolution of our applications.
Yeah, so here's the poll results up on your screen now. Looks like the majority of folks are investigating microservices, followed closely by using microservices in production. So it kind of sounds like looks like we're kind of down the road, which is a good thing. What do you guys make of this poll results?
Well, I think it's a good thing they're on this webinar.
All right then, enough said. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hide the results, and you guys can take over again.
Well, I wanted just to kind of step back and have a conversation on, why we're doing this. Why are we looking at microservices? Why are we going down this road? And also discuss how we got in this mess in the first place. But first, I wanted to talk about not containers. We're not doing that. We're talking about software as inventory. And if you have a brick and mortar company that sells widgets, inventory is risk. You turn cash into inventory. And if you get too little, you possibly leave money on the table. If you get too much, you have to liquidate it, and that affects your bottom line. While that inventory is sitting in the warehouse, that company is not making any money. And the same thing with software. Just like Mark Andreessen, stated, software is eating the world. All of our companies are becoming software companies, and ergo, the companies that write the best software and release it the fastest are going to win. And so the challenge for us is to how do we convert that cash that we're using to pay salaries for engineers and hardware and cloud services and all those things. How do we turn that into an application, get that in the hands of our customers quickly to increase revenue and lower costs? That's been the promise of DevOps, right, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you're talking about this, I can't help but think about all the times I've talked to teams that have done the Agile transformation, but not the DevOps one. Right? You're like, oh, what's your definition of done? Right? It's like code complete and tested. It's like,
yes, yes.
how much value have you delivered to your customer at that point?
Mm-hmm.
Zero. How much money are you making from it? Zero. All right. All the time you've spent so far is wasted until you get it out the door. It's the only thing that matters, is working software out the door. Working software on the shelf is a total waste of everybody's energy.
Yeah, it sure is, man. I mean, you know, there's a financial metric called cash conversion cycle, and this is something that your CFO is well versed in. You know, it's actually really useful to see if there's going to be a impending recession. That's what a lot of economists look at. What's the cash conversion cycle? Is it increasing? Is it lowering? Because if it's increasing, it means that companies are not selling their inventory fast enough. And we should also apply this to software. You know, it does nobody any good, just like you said, Eric, if it's just sitting on the shelf. If it's just sitting in test, or it's just waiting for a manual change from some engineer or a DBA, man, it's doing nothing for the company. So let's kind of talk about how we got into this mess in the first place. And this is something that, you know, I'm a big fan of. I really like this Conways Law. And this thing came out in the late 60s. And basically it says that your software architecture is going to follow the design of how your company communicates. And that's the real reason why we got into this 3-tier architecture, you know, because we had one team, you know, that the UI folks, those were HTML, JavaScript, look and feel folks. Then we had our Java developers, you know, middleware specialists, people that really knew how to translate that business logic into code. And then we had our DBAs. And each one of these groups had a responsibility. They were only in part, you know, in charge of the stack. And they looked at, you know, their team was very project focused. They were focused on tasks and things that they need to do at that level, but not the product itself. They really weren't concerned about getting it out the door. They were concerned about just, you know, updating that method or adding that table to a column or adding that, you know, look and feel to the user interface. You know, this needs to go away. We need to break down these silos, and that is the promise of microservices. Eric, what are your thoughts on these silos in Conway's Law?
Yeah, no, that's the, or I think the original framing was if you get 4 groups of developers together and ask them to build a compiler, you're going to get a 4-pass compiler. But the corollary, I think, is really important, which is the communication quality between the different groups that are working together dictates the communication quality of the app, right? So if, you know, these guys only get together occasionally because they're in very different teams in different cities, what have you, they don't talk very well, they kind of do their planning by passing documents back and forth, you're going to have kind of brittle API layers between these 3 sections, right? And changing that API is going to be a real pain for everybody. If they're sitting close to each other, even if they're technically 3 teams and they're at lunch together and they're working pretty closely, it's going to look better, right? The change across these boundaries is going to be smoother. So it's not just the org chart, but it's also the communication patterns between the individuals within the org chart that are very predictive of the architecture and the quality of the app as it is today. Oh,
for sure. And I think, you know, where we're trying to go is we're really trying to distribute these responsibilities, you know. And here we've got a diagram of, you know, centralized, decentralized, and distributed, just kind of describing what they mean. And we're really trying to get away from these silos where we must go to the UI specialist to get a change done to the look and feel. We must go to the Java developers to change business logic. Got to go to the DBAs to change something in the schema or the stored logic to support our app. I mean, time and time again, these are all ticket-driven tasks, and we need to get away from this. There should be no reason with the tools that we have available to us that the person that needs the change should be able to affect that change. There's no reason to have to go to another group and task them. They should be able to handle that internally. I mean, that's what you guys are really pushing over at IBM Urban Code, is this idea that why are we waiting, why do we need to create a ticket to push that application? Why can't that person just go to Urban Code and say, go, deploy it?
Yeah, amen. I think one of the classic indicators that a process is sick, right, is that a ticket is involved, right? if something needs to move quickly and there's a ticket involved, there's probably something that's not right there. That requires examination. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like all ticket tracking tools are evil or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, hey, if you're trying to move quickly as a team and there are tickets involved, fix the tickets, get rid of them. Figure out how you're going to improve communication so you don't need them. Right? I mean, I think the ideal that you're getting at there, Rob, is like that classic full stack developer, right? I can do infrastructure, database, middleware, app. I can do everything. The reality for a lot of teams, though, is, hey, there's someone who's better at database stuff than I am. The key is I don't want to file a ticket to get them to help me out. I want to tap them on the shoulder as they're sitting next to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, or give that ticket, when we're done, that Jira ticket or whatever we're using in dev, assign them to it. Why do a ticket on the back end? Why we're already doing it on the front end?
Yeah, amen.
That's one of the hallmarks of microservices. It's you build it, you run it. And so if that project team, which we're going to, away from these features and project-based stuff to actual product-based teams, we got to break that wall down because the person that is actually building it and is tasked with running it as well needs to have the freedom to do that. You can't ask somebody to do something, implement microservices and then say, but here's some leg weights that you have to run with. Here's some restrictions. It's just bad business, bad business. Now, I do want to point out this, and I just want to be really clear. Your software releases, well, they are not bespoke artisanal beard oil, all right? How you get your software out the door is not something, the craft of that is not special. No matter how clever of a release manager you are, and some really deft things that you're doing, the customer doesn't care about it. So there's no reason why you should have a separate release process for every single thing, every product that your company is making. There's no reason. You should be able to have a best practice or one that fits your company and lather, rinse, repeat. It should be able to be applicable to every single one of your releases. Urban Code enforces that with blueprints, right?
Yeah, no, we've got templates, and it might not be every single one, but it should be, hey, there's this classification of app and that classification of app and this classification of app. Let's roll them out. We were just talking recently with the guys at Travelers Insurance who changed automation tools over to Urban Code, and they migrated, I think, in 14 months, 3,000 applications or something. You can't do that if you treat each of those apps as what are we calling it? Bespoke artisanal beard oil, right? It's you're not special. You're a Cloud Foundry app, and you're a .NET app and you're a Java web app. And all the Java web apps are like this, and all the .NET apps are like that. Let's go, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Chunk it out, and don't let people say that they're special snowflakes, because they're just not. They're just an app. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're seeing the same thing with our Datical customers. And, prior to using Datical, they're having every single SQL script manually reviewed. And there's no special craft to that. I mean, there's no point in having a human enforce naming conventions and best practices with the database changes when that can be automated. There's no reason. All of that energy that is spent on that should be spent on adding features and building functionality into our applications that engage our customers more. That's where the bespoke artisanal, energy should be spent. Not in our internal processes and the things that we do. It's in the thing that actually engages the customer. So we've got another poll question here, and would like to hear kind of how the audience, why they're implementing microservices or looking at it at their company.
Yeah, okay, so I'm on the ball here. I got the poll launching right now. Why implement microservices at your company? You have a choice of 4. Helps us get to market faster, helps us scale our organization, increases our developer efficiency, or makes debugging and maintenance easier. You guys go ahead and make your selection. We'll give you guys about 30 seconds or so, and then we'll talk about the results. Also want to remind you guys that we are going to be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So if you have a question for either Robert or Eric, please feel free to use the control panel and submit your questions. And we will, like I said, take a look at them after the presentation. Okay, we've got, I would say about 5 more seconds, then we'll go ahead and close it out, take a look at the results. Okay, closing it now. And the results are, okay, looks like helps us get to market faster is the big winner on this one, guys. Although makes debugging and maintenance easier is a second. What do you guys think of these results? I mean, is it in line with what you guys are seeing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's all about time to market for so many organizations we're talking to, and I mean, there's so many companies that we wouldn't have expected. All right, I heard electricity company, right? The local utility. As I'm talking to them, talking about no, we gotta engage our customers better. We need faster time to market, and it's just amazing all the places that's coming from.
And that's really cool that a utility is thinking about that stuff. That is not speed and time to market is not something that I would normally associate with that.
All right.
It's good. I mean, it's heartening. I like the fact that that is number 1 because that's not a technical thing.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that is driving microservices, yes, there's benefit from a tech perspective. We know that. But I like that it seems like every week that goes by, our technical folks are becoming more business focused, and man, I like that because let's have a hurrah for the geeks. We want, and we're actually piloting the ship now as far as how we're going to drive and propel our businesses forward. And I like that. I like that we're not yes, we're focused on scaling and ease of use for developers, those sorts of things, but also being focused on that market and why we want to get our apps out faster. That's cool, man.
Yeah, it's definitely a business driver, it seems like. All right, I'll go ahead and hide that.
Okay, thank you. So, how do we fix, our problems before it's too late? And we certainly described, what are microservices, what are some challenges around it. But I think, look, you guys showed up on this webinar to really learn something and try to figure out how to solve this problem. And, from our perspective, you have got to adopt microservices throughout the organization. You cannot just have a handful of folks and still have these kind of shared services organizations that you need to go to. The dev and test teams need to be able to provision servers. They need to be able to get them through cloud services whenever they need them and shut them down. But we can't, especially from the Datapool perspective, we cannot just have tickets that we send to our DBAs. We need to be able to allow these teams, these project teams that are focusing on getting the app out, have the ability to make those database changes. We need to have distributed data management, and we need to be able to do it safely. If, just like Eric was saying, if you have a ticket, it is a bad process smell. Just like a code smell, just like an anti-pattern, it's something that you need to address and look at. If you are creating tickets for your DBAs, for security, for network, for provisioning, you got to solve that problem first. You got to tackle that, because if not, all of the effort that you spent on going to microservices and re-architecting your application is wasted. The other thing that we're seeing is this drive to cross-functional teams. And Eric, are you seeing teams adopting more of a product focus and getting away from just development? Are you seeing more you build it, you run it?
Yeah. So I think there's two things. At least you build it, you maintain it, right?
Okay.
Not this idea like that's certainly happening where people are like, this is my app. I'm going to build it. I'm going to extend it. I'm going to be here a while. It's not like I'm development team 97 and project 33 came to me and I'm going to be working on this for the next 6 months in 2 days. That's what the Gantt chart says. And then it's going to go off to something else. You build it, you own it at some level. Maybe you run it. Maybe there's an SRE team that you're partnered up with. So maybe there's still some kind of traditional ops. But yeah, you build it, you own it, you live with it for a while. That's happening, and certainly within IBM even, we've done a lot of reorgs over the last couple of years to bring together development, testers, designers, SRE, and get them closer and closer together in the org, so they are functioning as one team. And I see that in our customers all the time as well. And I'm a big follower of the no projects hashtag out on Twitter too, because I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it is a stretch though. I mean, you've got these organizations, these large corporations that have been around for a long time. These applications have been around for a long time, and there is kind of, there's a lot of cruft in those orgs. And what are Eric, let me ask you this. At IBM, how were you guys able to break those silos? I mean, is it dotted line? Is it just those folks move over and it's a manager who now has QA, dev, and ops? How did you guys make that, that change? Is it gradual, or was it just overnight we're doing this?
No, it's been gradual, and usually dotted line precedes solid line in the gradual change. But yeah, it's been going on for a while, and we certainly had a kind of centralized DevOps transformation team that was engaging senior management to say, look, we're going to, try to drive this cultural change, and then go to the product teams and say, we're changing in this way, and your senior management is bought in. And oh, by the way, part of this goes to the C-level, and that's why we're all doing this. And that helps, right? So it's everywhere from getting the top-level executive buy-in to then engaging with development teams and, the whole management chain. It's a process, and it steps on toes, but it is well worth it.
Yeah, and you've certainly, we've talked about this ticket. It's, man, It's an easy way. See, if you see a ticket, that's a problem that you need to address. Not the ticket itself, but the requirement for it. You know, like I said earlier, old companies been around for a while. There's a lot of organizational inertia, and it might not be possible to have all of those folks that you need join that product team. There might be reasons that you can't do it, especially initially. And one of the things that best practice that I've seen, and Eric, I'm sure you would agree, that, you know, if you cannot have that team, that INO, infrastructure and operations team, be a part of your product team, then those external teams need to provide services. They need to provide that value add service, you know, in a way that well, self-service. I mean, they need to be able to do build as a service, deploy as a service, DBA as a service. These are things that are offered so that the product teams can say, oh, I need to have a build, and this team over here takes care of it, but I don't have to create a ticket to get a build done. They just provide the infrastructure for me. Same thing with deployments and DBAs. You know, there's certainly a lot of value that DBAs can offer as far as performance best practices with, you know, how to craft a query or the best way to do a stored procedure. But to be able to push that, you know, typically what we've seen is more junior DBAs are doing it. And by automating that, you get a lot of benefit. That's, you know, what you guys have seen is also with Urban Code, right, Eric?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think across all these areas, there's high value work, right, that a DBA is doing, right? Optimizing something, helping with really tough queries, that kind of thing. That's where you want them spending their time, right? You want your release engineers, you know, figuring out, oh, 3% of the time we release to this platform, it fails. How can we detect that failure and automatically remediate it? Like, that's a really good use of time. Doing rote, repetitive stuff is not. And so taking that time that you had spent doing the rote work and replacing that with, I'm going to take that time to build buttons, and people can press the buttons and the rote work happens, that's good. So, you know, you're talking about this as deliver it as a service. I talk about it as becoming a button builder instead of a doer.
That's right. You know, in a former life when I was a release manager, my focus, you know, as somebody asked me what my job was, I said my job is to script myself out of a job. I need to be able to provide everybody in the org the ability to do what I do and just take care of the system. That is high value stuff. Getting a single build out, meh. You know, a single deployment, but being able to provide somebody the infrastructure that they can do themselves, that's where you get scalability. That's real value add. So we've got our last poll here. Deb, you want to take it?
I'll take it, Charlene. What is your biggest challenge? That's all right, to address microservices. Launching the poll right now. What is your biggest challenge to adopting microservices? We lack the right skills, our company culture, increases our operational overhead, or increase our need for testing. Go ahead and make your choice based on one of those four. And also, final reminder, if you have a question for Robert or for Eric, you can also use the control panel to go ahead and submit your question. And then when we get done with the presentation, we'll take our audience questions. Okay, we'll go in about 15 seconds more, and then we'll close it out, take a look at the poll results. Yeah, okay, we're going to go ahead and close it now. And the results are, our company culture is the big winner in this one, which I don't think is winning at all.
Well, it sounds like we're talking about the right stuff, Eric.
Yeah, well, you know, it goes back to Agile, right? It's people and interactions above process and tools. You know, and I think that's the hard part for everybody. You know, and I love folks who talk about, you know, kind of hacking culture. Right? Some of that is training and things like that, and some of it is, you know, even how you implement a tool, right? So it's, oh, I've made this behind a button and I said press it, or I, you know, put in a different chat service that makes it easier for us to talk to each other all the time. You know, we've changed our communication structure so that it's more video chat rather than just text chat. There's a lot of ways of kind of tweaking culture, a ton written on it, but yeah, it's all culture, isn't it, Rob?
Yeah, we're all people, man. It's at the end of the day just humans, just you know, trying to make a small living for a big family, and you know, it's important that we put all the people in our organization in a position to be successful. That's, you know, you can't say, oh, go do microservices. You know, somebody reads, an executive reads something on the plane and says, oh, we're doing microservices now. Well, there's a little bit more to it than that. You know, it's cultural changes, but also tools, and also, you know, frankly, you know, a different approach, a mental shift, if you will, on how you look at these problems. That move from, you know, projects to products, that's pretty big for a lot of, you know, companies to make that shift. You got to change everything.
It doesn't the company culture also kind of drive everything else, though? I mean, you know, the first runner up is we lack the right skills. Well, if you don't have the right company culture to support going out and getting those skills, then, you know, obviously that's never going to happen.
Well, for sure. Yeah, it's a big, you know, we're talking about, you know, any patterns of culture, you know, from tickets. Another one is if you hear the phrase, well, we've always done it that way. No. You know, so, you know, you need to seek out, good managers are going to make sure their folks are trained. Good managers are going to make sure that their folks are empowered to do good things. If not, well, frankly, their competitors are going to figure it out.
Gone are the days where IT is just a cost center, right? It is something we win and lose on.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and close this out and let you guys get back to it.
So this is the last slide we're going to go over, and then we're going to open it up for questions. But at the end of the day, you know, what we want to leave you guys with is the idea that you need to enforce best practices at every step. And Eric, do you want to explain that first point?
Yeah. So, you know, there's the dream in microservices where everything is totally decoupled, right? And you can just build, test, and deploy one microservice at a time, and you know it's going to work with everything else because all the APIs are perfect. Mm-hmm. And then there's how people actually write code, which is like, oh, well, I actually do have to test it against everything else because our APIs are not quite as perfect as we dream. And that leads you to this point where if you have to test it against everything else, you have to make sure that what you release is kind of that collection of stuff that you tested. You don't want to say, all right, I've got this set of things in production, I've got different things in test, I've got a new version of my microservice, I tested against all the things in test, and now I'm going to move it by itself to different things that are in production. That's kind of hope-based releasing, and it doesn't always work. So you want to release based on what you test. So if you have to test it together, release it together. That kind of coordination and making that really easy to do, that's what we do on the Urban Code side. And that extends from front-end work to transactional systems like the mainframe and then back to the database. And Rob, that's your sweet spot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, time and time again, we see prior to using Datacle, our customers were using manually making changes to the database. They're executing SQL scripts. And typically that's a long delay. You create a ticket and then you have to wait until that change is actually made and persisted to the database. And the reason why we hear, from customers like, oh, well, we do that because we want a person to review these changes. And when we were releasing once a quarter, that made sense. We wanted the world's, most advanced computer, the human brain, to review all these scripts. But that's not good enough. And now with Datable DB, and our ability to enforce these standards to make certain that you are not going to violate a naming convention, all right? But more importantly, there are SQL, our database best practices. For example, if you create a foreign key, you should make certain that the columns as part of that foreign key already have an index applied. Well, that typically involves a DBA going and looking at those columns manually, and we can do that automatically with Datable DB, enforce those sorts of standards. But what we do is we enforce it at every single step. So when that dev deploys to their local environment and they have Datable DB as part of their tool chain, well, it's going to flag maybe one of their changes. Oh, you're adding this foreign key, but you didn't have an index on that column. Well, the developer, just like a unit test, is going to know. And so enforcing that safety through all environments is so important and crucial for our customers. They're already doing it today with a cast of thousands. But they can better apply all those human resources to things that help the customer and make it more compelling for them. And Eric, this last point, this was something that you brought up when we were chatting and preparing for this webinar.
Yeah. One of the things that we've seen as people begin to adopt microservices and go through any sort of a change, really, is they say, okay, we're going to start with like some super easy application, right? And we're going to bring it over and see if we can do microservices for the easiest application in the company, and then we'll build some tools around it, and then we're going to scale that, back to everything else. We'll bring it over. And that leads you to not handling the complexity that's in most of your apps, right? Maybe you picked an app without the database, and so you left out a data call, right? Any number of ways to do this. You need to find kind of normal apps and go through the harder work of bringing some of those towards microservices and building out your tool chain for those, because that's going to show you what the problem space is, and it's going to lead you to building the right kind of tools around it. So it's just a super easy mistake to make, is to try to start with the easy stuff and work your way up, but it leads to mistakes. So start with something normal or even on the hard end of the spectrum.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I couldn't agree with you any more. I mean, it is, it's very easy to build up a straw man and, oh, we're going to adopt DevOps for our new applications. These other old applications have been around for years for a reason, because they work, they generate revenue, they cut costs for the company. And if you're not applying these new ways of architecting applications, if you're not applying best practices to the ones that really move the needle on your, on your P&L statement, then it's wasted effort. You've got to get, any time you're going to adopt a new way of doing business, you've got to apply it to the big things. You can't run away from those problems. You have to approach them head on. So we've got, we're opening up for questions, and we've got a couple of white papers here for folks to download. But Charlene, you want to go ahead and give us our first batch of questions?
Yeah, sure. Regarding the white papers, though, just real quick, we've sent out the links to those white papers in the chat box. So if the audience wants to take a look in the chat box, they'll be there waiting for you. The links will also be included in the follow-up email that also includes a link to the recorded webinar. So if you guys saw links and you weren't sure what it was, it's to these white papers here. So, okay, let's move on to the questions now. The first one here is from Marcy, who asks, can you speak to this change to microservices and the need for consulting or product organizations like Datical to help lead the effort versus driven by the organization itself?
Yeah, we could. Yeah, Eric, I definitely want you to weigh in on this. But look, it is nothing's going to change in these organizations unless you get management buy-in, and the higher the better. There is going to be hand-wringing and gnashing of teeth. There's going to be a lot of unknowns, and without sponsorship, unless the executive leadership of that company says this is the right thing to do, we are doing it for these reasons, let's go, there is going to be a move back to the old way of doing things. Now, bringing in a vendor like Datical, like IBM, can certainly help with that, but it is imperative to also have the organization a willingness to do that, because certainly services, service teams, consultants can come in and say, this is how you should do it. It really is up to the individual company to say, we are going to do this. Eric, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, it's your app. You got to own it. Now, if you need someone to help show you the way, great, right? That's where I think consultancy comes in. That's why IBM has practices like their garages, the Bluemix garages, where we say, hey, come send a team to come live with us for a couple of months, and we'll go build something together, and then you'll know how to do it, and you'll go back and you'll teach others. But that's a jump start, right? The organizational transformation you gotta own as your company, because software is important and you are going to care about it and you are going to drive success through it. Tool vendors, yeah, we can be the arms dealers, but you're fighting the fight.
All right, great. Next question is from Matthias, who asks, do you have metrics in terms of effort required to re-architect monolithic apps to microservices?
I do not. I think it really would depend on the application itself. But I would caution to look at it like just simply cost benefit like that. Here's why. The benefit is that the company is going to be able to get this release out faster and engage that customer better. And certainly there is a cost associated with it. But I would look at it more of binary. We are not going to be able to get to this place we want to be as an organization unless we do this. Yes, it's going to be costly, but it will not be as costly as doing nothing at all. Eric, do you guys have any metrics on that, like the amount of effort involved in going from monolithic to microservices?
Oh, did we lose Eric?
And I kept myself on mute. So I was just saying, someone at IBM's got it. I don't. I think one of the patterns that we see that's successful is called the Strangler pattern, where you take your monolith and you pull a small piece of it out and you start writing that as a microservice. And when it's ready, you just reroute the calls out of your monolith to that portion out to the new microservice. Mm-hmm. And that allows you to focus your microservice work on parts of your existing apps that are probably being developed anyway, and you're re-architecting as part of that, adds a little bit to your cost, but lets them move faster going forward. And that's sort of a pattern where it's not I'm throwing out all of my apps all the code I already have. Rather, it's a gradual refactor. Does seem to work pretty well for people and kind of balance kind of the investment in re-architecture and rapid returns that you'd be looking for if you're trying to make a financial justification.
Okay. All right. Next question is from Sean, who says, business logic for mobile app and web may need to live in an interaction layer above the microservices, I think it's MS services, if it differs from the CRM internal process platform. Do you agree with this pattern?
So let me make sure I got that straight. So we've got we've got a mobile app, we've got the web stuff, it's calling a web service, but there's something else, another app that might be using the old way of interacting. I hope I read that right.
Yeah, I got
Eric, is that what you heard?
I think just some of the business logic lives in the mobile app rather than calling back to the microservices.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of what I heard, and I think that probably makes sense in some places for just kind of speed and interactivity in that app. You do lose your ability to kind of iterate as quickly as you'd want, because now your updates get pushed to the customer at the rate that they download the mobile app. And as a guy who has like 35 little red dots sitting on the app update right now, I'm very sensitive to not wanting to do that with my apps, but I think that's a trade-off between user experience and ability to innovate that you just kind of got to negotiate within your team where you need it. As much as you can have that where you control the updates, the better. But hey, you got to have a delightful user experience. I think it's a balancing act. I don't know, Rob, if that's how you read it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting problem. You know, you've got customers that might have old, mobile apps, and you're trying to change the back end. There is a pattern to support that. Expand, migrate, contract pattern, where you add a new web service, and you migrate folks off of the old one to the new web service, and then once everybody is off, then you can kill the old one. And certainly by monitoring the old web service, you can see who those stragglers are and make the decision on whether it's worthwhile to continue supporting them. But expand, migrate, contract. Check that pattern out.
All right, great. Doing a quick time check here. We're about 7 minutes to the top of the hour, and we do have a lot of customer questions, or sorry, audience questions to go through. But just a reminder, if you do have a question for Robert or Eric, it's not too late. You can always go ahead and get your question in. Next question is from Matthew, who asks, is Datical DB a third-party UCD plugin?
Yeah, it sure is. We've got a lot of mutual customers, and yes, they work together very well. What we envision is, from Datical's perspective, is that when you do a deployment with Urban Code, you just deploy. There we go. I don't care where the deployment went. Did we update the database? I don't care, man. Did the deployment work? And so, in a sense, Datical kind of folds into the background there. Whether it's tied into your build server or something else, your deployments, that's what we do. We know that our customers have invested a lot in application release automation frameworks like IBM Urban Code Deploy, and it is just rude to go into somebody's house and start moving around furniture. It's important for Datical that we integrate with the infrastructure you have in place and increase the value of that investment you've made. Okay.
Great. Got a question here from Evan, who asks, for a large organization, what are your thoughts on standardizing the stack across teams versus using the best stack for the problem domain, such as Spring Boot versus Dropwizard versus Node.js?
What do you think, Eric?
Sounds like a loaded question, but
oh, it's so loaded. Do you ever feel like these questions are coming out of a marital dispute?
I know.
Yeah, I lean a little bit towards tie goes to standardization. There are times when a standard stack is just really, really wrong for an app, and there should be a way that they can go do what's right for them. But when you're in this situation where, like, well, for our app, framework A scores 95 out of 100 and framework B scores 92, if B, the 92 guy, is the corporate standard, use the corporate standard. It's good enough. It's going to be good for everybody. As people change teams and companies as they do, there'll be less friction. You'll be less artisanal beard oil. All of those things are just better. But there's got to be an escape hatch. That's my sense on it. I don't know, Rob, you want to wander into this minefield?
No, look, sometimes, we've seen this with database choices. At the end of the day, it is splitting hairs if you're really concerned about performance and those sorts of things. There are some examples of where, like something other than Oracle SQL Server DB2 would work really well. And we see that with financial services companies adopting Cassandra. It's really great tool for fraud detection because you see outliers and aberrations very easily. So companies use Cassandra for things like, somebody tried to use your card and buy $1 of gasoline. Was this you? And so we've all gotten those text messages. That's a good example of something that might not be a corporate standard where it just works. But I'm with Eric. If you're just shaving, splitting hairs here, then just go with the corporate standard. You got to understand what might be easier for you is not easier for the rest of the company, and you just have to be a good corporate citizen. But being a good corporate citizen is also standing up and saying, no, this is the right thing for the business.
Okay. Great. Quick time check. We're about 3 minutes to make that 2 minutes at the top of the hour. I think we have time for one more question. Lewis asks, what is Datical DB? Is it a database deployment tool? Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, that's what it is. We do database release automation. So instead of creating those tickets and having somebody manually execute a SQL script, what we can do is automate that. Now, the secret sauce is that we're able to do it safely. And so that means that if somebody creates a table, then the name violates a naming convention, we're going to flag that. We support Oracle, DB2, SQL Server, DB2 Distributed, and for ZOS, and then also Enterprise DB, the paid Postgres, paid version of Postgres.
All right. Great. Well, I think we are pretty much out of time for audience questions, but I do want to just let you guys know that if we did not get to your question during the Q&A period, the questions are all going out to Rob and Eric post-event, so hopefully they'll be able to follow up with you guys at some point during the next few days or so. And then also please remember, if you missed any or all of today's webinar, you will have the chance to listen to it on demand. There should be a link coming your way via email, hopefully this afternoon, maybe tomorrow at the latest, along with the links to the 2 white papers that you see on the screen, one from Datical, one from IBM. I believe the slides will also be available. You can also see the link on devops.com. Please be sure to check the website for other fabulous webinars that we have on tap. We've got a ton of them. And it just leaves it for me to thank Robert Reeves and Eric Minnick for being our fabulous panelists today. Thank you guys for joining me. I really do appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Of course. Thanks for having us.
It was fun.
All right, great. Well, again, I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. I'm the moderator for today's event, and I'm signing off. Thank you all for joining me.